Okay, Mike.
All right, we'll get the work session for the Planning Commission on, what is today, the 27th of August started, so we can get through it and move on to a regular session at 7 o'clock as timely as possible. Pete, make it happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Mady. My name is Pete Walter, planner, and with me is Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning. And tonight, this is our third work session. I think so. And we're going to concentrate tonight on the items that we wanted to clarify, that staff felt were needing clarification, and we can discuss other things as well. But the items that came up from the prior work sessions include the ones on the list here, and we've put these up before you so that we can go through them, and we're going to go through each one of these in detail. They include the issue of owner occupancy for accessory dwelling units, off-street parking for accessory dwelling units, internal conversions, 3 to 4 plexes, the 45-foot height limit in the mixed-use downtown issue, transitional shelters, food carts, and master plan PUDs, and finally, natural resources overlay district, which is a pretty minor issue. And what we'd like to do is get some clarification and direction from the commission on each of these issues now, and then we'll talk about it when we go into the hearing at 7 o'clock. Okay? So.
Did you say Bob's not going to be here? How about Paul? Because my players are going to just go down there.
Do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Like,
When it's on.
Hey, Tom.
all right. Good evening, Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning. Apologies, I'm a little hoarse tonight just because I was at, frankly, a social event talking too much last night. But glad to be here with you this evening, and just hoping to give a little background on a couple issues that I understand there's still some questions on. So starting with owner occupancy for ADUs. The proposal from the PAT and out of all of our open houses and staff.
Just real quick, PAT,
The,
Project advisory team
yes,
which project?
for the equitable housing.
equitable housing.
Okay, I'm just saying it because it's the first time
Yeah.
tonight, so.
Yeah,
Great, yes.
thank you.
And so as part of the equitable housing project, looking at ways to increase missing middle housing across the city and provide more variety. And so one of those ways is by adding more supporting ADU development, in part by revising the city's existing regulations, including removing the requirement for owner occupancy. Right now, the requirement in the code requires that the property owner live on site either in the primary dwelling or the ADU. And the proposal is to remove that requirement so that there's a lot more flexibility in who can live in the property over time. And my own thinking on this has really evolved a bit, as I've gotten more into the issues about equitable housing and talking to some development professionals in the ADU field. On its surface, I think most homeowners that I talk to that have built an ADU go into this thinking, well, that's not a problem. That's not going to be an obstacle. I intend to live there. Like, that's why I'm doing it. Like, this is a difficult project. It is expensive. It's not just, it's a very personal project that you're doing on your own property. And so people aren't just doing this cavalierly, like, how can I make some extra money? Most of the people that are involved in this. But it turns out that the owner occupancy requirement has a lot of short and long-term impacts that are a lot farther reaching than can be originally anticipated. So, and that altogether, really, owner occupancy is one of the top 3 barriers to developing ADUs identified by various ADU experts. So one of the biggest reasons really has to do with financing. And so as it is, it's already very difficult to finance ADUs. You can't walk in and get a mortgage like you can for any other housing type. And so there's already limited options on the table, but owner occupancy further limits those options, because if owner occupancy is required for the property, then the assessment of the property is far less. And therefore you don't have the same collateral to put up in trying to get a loan. So if you can't get the funding to build the ADU, there simply is no ADU. So even though, regardless of what the homeowner's intentions are or not, the owner occupancy can prevent the lending coming through, preventing the funding needed to build it. Another is just that, it provides more flexibility. As I said, a lot of homeowners walk in, they have every intention of living on the property, and 5-10 years down the road, their needs might change. They might have a job or a school that necessitates a move, or people aging, family might have surprising needs. And so just having the extra security and flexibility of knowing that you could make a change if you needed to really helps people, put their minds to ease about some of those like what ifs. And so again, if they can't get it built, then that's one fewer housing option that we have on the table. And then it also is really a basic fairness issue in terms of creating parity with all the other housing types. There are no tenancy requirements of any other dwelling type in the city. So anything else that you want to build, no one's gonna come knock on the door and say, do you own this property? Are you renting? And so, in part, that's because it's a very difficult job for the city to enforce. How many people would like to have the city code enforcement officer come knock on the door and say, hey, who are you? Who's living here? That's just not standard practice for other dwelling types. And so it makes sense to treat ADUs similarly in terms of creating just a basic fairness assumption there. There we go. And then
Back one. You have reducing code enforcement complaints.
Oh, yeah, that's just what I was discussing. Just about not having somebody come up to the door and knock about who's living there and are you related to this person? And
Okay, real quick, you said that it's harder to get financing if you have owner occupancy. And I don't know, I guess if I was loaning money, I'd want to know that the person I'm loaning money to is going to be there.
my understanding, and this isn't my primary field, but that banks are assessing in terms of like how much is my investment worth, and so the bank wants to know if I had to take this property over because the property owner is defaulting, I want to know what can I use this property for, and if I have 2 rentable units, then it's worth more to the bank than if I only have 1 rentable unit.
Right.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I've heard that's the rationale. And I know there's some work trying to, get some changes in lending practices and helping assessors understand better what the value is. But right now it can be a real
And they
obstacle.
can't just seize the basement.
Right, that's the other thing is it's non-divisible right now,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
they want to make sure that they have a good investment. All right, any other questions?
No.
Okay, so there are also, there's certainly some concerns that come up around ADUs and owner occupancy. And so I thought I'd walk through some of the ones I've heard here and in other jurisdictions and just talk about some considerations that we could have on the table in terms of making your final recommendation. So we certainly hear a lot of concerns around short-term rentals of ADUs. And I think a point to consider here is that short-term rentals of any dwellings, whether it's homes, ADUs, duplexes, anything, currently requires a conditional use permit in all residential zones. They would be classified as a bed and breakfast. Anything where you have tenancy of 30 days or less requires that conditional use permit. So it really doesn't matter what dwelling type it is. And it would certainly cover ADUs. Another concern that we sometimes hear is about that if you remove owner occupancy, you might see an increased number of renters in certain neighborhoods. And I think a consideration there is just, again, back to the parity issue, there are no limitations on renting any other housing type, in any existing neighborhoods. And so, the house on the corner could be rented, the duplex down the street could have both rented. And also in terms of the overall scope of the equitable housing project, and what we know from our housing needs analysis, more housing options are really needed for both renters and owners right now. So, even if it did increase the number of renters, that would be helping the city meet its goals in terms of housing its existing and projected population. There's also some concerns that it could lead to speculative development with people coming in, buying homes that have the potential to add an ADU, adding the ADU, and then flipping it really quickly, or, just renting both out. And I think a few things to consider. I do have some data that suggests that isn't really a prevailing trend, but also, even if it were to happen in, whether it's built by developers or homeowners, ADUs, for one thing, provide additional housing types. And they also really help maintain existing neighborhood character by discouraging demolitions. ADUs provide an option that you can add value to the existing property, add more flexibility in terms of how many housing units you have, how you use that property, rather than encouraging tear downs and new construction. So I'm always cautious when introducing data from, not exactly peer cities. I'm very much aware that, Oregon City is not hoping to be Portland. But, we don't have a crystal ball to see exactly what's going to happen in Oregon City. I mean, they forgot to give us one in planning school. I'm sorry. We asked. Sorry, that joke never gets old. But so we don't exactly, I can't sit here and promise you that I know what's going to happen if owner occupancy regulations were approved one way or the other. But we do have some comparison. And Portland is really the only city with enough ADUs at this point to have statistically significant data. So it's really not a perfect comparison city because they do not have an owner occupancy requirement and they explicitly permit short-term rentals. So those are two big caveats. But this is the best data available, so I wanted to bring it and make it part of our discussion tonight.
I don't know how well their monitoring is working since I've been reading up on it in the paper. It's not working.
And so, right, exactly. There are multiple issues, but this is just the best data we have. So to the extent that you feel it's applicable for your consideration, some trends that we're seeing are that ADUs are overwhelmingly constructed by long-term homeowners for additional flexibility with their existing homes, rather than new homeowners or speculative developers. You see in purple here on the left, over 40% of ADUs were built by homeowners that have been in their homes for more than 10 years. So they're making a significant investment in their property. And only 5% of ADUs were built by homeowners that had owned the home for a year or less. And so suggesting here that owner occupancy requirements, not having an owner occupancy requirement is not necessarily fueling a development boom of people coming in, buying the properties and adding an ADU, flipping it really quickly. And that instead ADUs really tend to be built by long-term stable homeowners. And then on the right, we do have a little data that suggests that even where short-term rentals are permitted, again, key difference, with Oregon City, ADUs are still predominantly used for residential use. The data there suggests that about 2/3 of ADUs are used for either long-term rentals or rent-free to house family and friends, and that only 1/3 are used for short-term rentals. And we'd expect an even higher percentage of long-term rentals and use by family and friends in Oregon City, again, since those short-term rentals would require a conditional use permit as a B&B.
So before you move on to that one, my biggest concern about this is, and I've been pretty vocal about it, is I don't want to live next to a building that's now become a hotel. I have no problem with people wanting to have ADUs and, how people use them as granny flats or whatever, but, I think what we've seen, and I just was reading up on what Cannon Beach is going through, what Manzanita's going through, what Neskowin's going through, Lincoln County's considering some regulations, and again, I've been a little disappointed in what the city of Portland has not been able to get a handle. We have people who are using ADUs right now for short-term rentals, which basically makes it a hotel, people coming and going, and I'm not saying that it's that these are noisy people or whatever, but the ones that I'm aware of, it's happening. They're not obviously voluntarily coming in and saying, I want to do this, and what is the proper way for me to do this so that it's legal. They're just kind of doing it. And people, unfortunately, want to take the path of least resistance until they get caught, which I think is unfortunate. I don't want to see, for me personally, and I'm speaking very from myself, I don't want to live next door to somebody that's using it as a B&B or not a B&B, but Airbnb or by Casa or, whatever. That to me causes some instability in the long-term viability of a residential neighborhood. I'm not saying everybody on every block's going to do it, but there is some discomfort that I have been feeling, and I also have been reading about this. And of course, the papers doing both, all the papers that I read, which is considerable, not just the Oregonian, talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And again, there are many unintended consequences, which is how I look at a lot of these things we're proposing. What are the unintended consequences? Not that I want to try to prevent everything, but let's be sure what we're doing before we do it, and we look at both sides of the coin, as opposed to just, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced toast, let's just do it because everybody else is doing it. I don't think that's really where Oregon City wants to be.
Well, there's more than one way to deal with a potential problem like that. You know, if the commission did decide to go with this removal of the owner occupancy requirement, and there were negative impacts associated with exactly what you're talking about, we could revisit the requirement in the future. You know, and I think any one of these regulations is parcelized enough that you could do that. You know, but you know, I guess you should ask for the entire commission, you know, how much of an impediment is this? And
Well, maybe I'm the only one that sees it as looking at the dark side, so to speak. As a planner,
Yeah, sure.
we're trained to look at unintended consequences. And by the way, the crystal balls did get handed out when I graduated, but mine is in the shop. So mine's in the shop right now, and it's, crystal ball repair is very slow.
It's hard to find a trusted repair guy.
It is, and I do have found one.
You're not the only one.
Yours is in the shop too?
No,
Oh.
that questions that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and just a couple other considerations, because this certainly is a topic that, you know, as you say, is worth consideration of all the different aspects. And so I guess the first is just, you know, just a reminder that bed and breakfasts are a conditional use, whether it's in an ADU, whether it's in the main house, and if people are using it for renting out for less than 30 days, then, you know, that would suggest an enforcement problem of the existing regulations, not necessarily something where additional regulations might be the answer. Another, you know, just anecdotal, you know, in terms of whether an owner occupancy would be a regulatory tool that would help address that concern. Anecdotally, most examples that I've heard of ADUs being used for Airbnb and Vacasa, because there's so much turnover of the ADU, the other unit is normally owner occupied. It's normally the owner that's living in their primary dwelling using their ADU. So they would, changing the owner occupancy requirements wouldn't necessarily directly address or help repress Airbnb use.
well, let me pose this at the reverse. So
Yeah.
why don't we just leave it in, and if it seems to be a problem, let's look at it in the future and then we can change it, which is exactly what Pete said. We could take a look at, I mean, let's bump it down the road and see if this is a problem for the community. If it's a problem, the future planning commission could come back and make an amendment to the code and take it out.
But I for one, I don't see any problem with removing the owner occupancy requirement.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I may be the only one.
I think, I mean, you just said, I mean, it's regardless, it's not legal to have this as a short-term rental. So it's really not an issue whether or not it's owner occupied, it's an enforcement issue.
it's a B&B enforcement issue.
So.
You don't want to get me started on the enforcement aspect of what's going on, so never, we'll skip that.
I don't, because
Yeah.
it's not in our purview.
No, but if that's what we're relying on, I'm not feeling confident that that's going to happen.
But our system is built on other systems that just have to trust that that system works.
I like trust, but verify.
Sure.
Yeah, I just, you know, to go back to some of the rationales for, you know, in favor of this for your consideration, you know, both sides of the issue. Just that we are seeing some problems already with the owner occupancy requirement, maybe not Oregon City, but generally, that it is one of the top 3 concerns as a barrier to ADU development because of the way it impacts financing availability, as well as the flexibility of the use for homeowners. So those are some concerns that have come up that could be considered by the commission in terms of, you know, is it a problem now? Is this the time to address this regulation and make a change? Any other thoughts on owner occupancy?
Yep.
Yes, please.
Well, I believe that we're in this equitable housing, we're looking at removing barriers. And ADU owner occupancy becomes a barrier in some cases. It may become all sorts of bad things down the road, but we don't have much data to tell us that it will.
So let's just leave it alone.
And we're really on a mission here, I think, to provide more equitable housing. And this may not be the biggest fish in the pond of water to catch, but anyone we can move forward and become a viable way to provide affordable housing, equitable housing across the board, and create 2 living units out of what was originally 1. So it seems like it meets what we're trying to do with equitable housing. And to dig our heels in, or dig my heels in anyway, to say, no, we don't want to because there may be problems down the road. Same thing can be said for the problems down the road. Future commissions could change it back again. But we won't find out unless I'm not going to say take risk, but seize the opportunity. And we could see it as a potential risk. And if it materializes, correct it.
So this might be a good time for me to do my input. I have been watching, even though I've not been here, I've been watching you, listening to everything. I understand the full intent of what these are going to be about. I appreciate all the effort that's gone into it. But I was making notes to myself, and I have, ever since this began, I don't see that there's ever going to be anything equitable, anytime. I watch the Chit Chats in Oregon City, I watch the Chit Chats in Milwaukee, and all the different ones. People are still looking for apartments or anything. Someone can subdivide their house, and the people who want to make money are still going to charge large amounts. The way I look at it, I can divide my house, it's 2,900 square feet in 4, and still I would probably charge the most I could out of it. So every time I hear us talk about equitable housing, equitable and affordable housing, all the things that are being developed, even up in our area, I know it's all new homes, but they started 469,000. When I bought mine here, it was less than half of that. And that was just a few years back. The economy is such right now that everyone's going to charge anything they can. We can approve it and we can allow it to go on, but still the ADUs or whatever, equitable housing. But I seriously, as someone who's lived it quite a long time, not as long as Bob, whose seat I'm sitting in, but I don't see that we're going to accomplish anything for equitable or affordable housing through any of this, because those people who own homes are still going to try and cover their mortgages by renting out another portion of it to someone else. I can understand having a grandmother live with you or a mother-in-law or something like that. And yes, you could probably give a spare room to them, but I don't think we're going to ever see the point where someone's going to divide their house or their apartment, like in Portland, and not charge an exorbitant amount to people. And just my feelings on it, because until the economy starts tanking again, like 2008 when prices came down, as long as things keep going up, I think any time that anybody has a chance to divide it, they're going to charge as much as they can because they want to cover their own expenses too and their own mortgage. Just my thought.
I agree, and I think,
It's a guess.
but I think the difference being is a person charging as much as they could for an ADU is going to be a lot less than they would if they were renting your house. So it's that goal of a diversity of housing and having the small ones in the mix as well as the 400,000+ is the goal. So
As I said, I can understand the intent and what we'd like to do. I just don't see it.
I mean, that's still my
in my
bill for
mind.
$1,000 a month, but I mean, how many rental properties do we have for $1,000 a month in Oregon City or less?
And I see on Chit Chat, people are so desperate. Is there anything where I can move in? It's just me and my child, or me and my family, and we don't have very much money. And every time someone responds on any of those Chit Chats, there's just nothing available. And they start so high. And I keep thinking you divide a house, they're going to use that portion. Hey, it can pay for part of my mortgage too. But I know the intent. I know we're trying to do the best for our city and to get affordable housing. But I don't think anything's going to change while the economy is doing what it's doing. That's just my thought. I've been wanting to say that for the last 2 sessions, but I wasn't here to say it.
I don't fundamentally disagree with my colleagues. I just think that equitable housing is an aspiration and
Yeah.
the rubber will hit the road later. I just don't want to have to deal with the fallout.
Yeah, I just, a couple points.
Sorry.
No, broadly, I think those are great issues to bring up and just, it just helps set the context. I think, you know, the goal of the Equitable Housing Project is not to necessarily control rent levels or necessarily support only development of housing types that will rent below X number of dollars per month, but really just like you're talking about, just to increase the supply and the variety of options so that, you know, yes, it might not be a perfect match of like, maybe I'd rather pay $500 than $1,500, but I'd rather have a place to rent for $1,500 than no place at all. So just providing that supply and variety. And there is, I'm trying to find it right now, but of course I can't pull it up right now. Again, limited survey, but the ADU data does suggest that ADU homeowners renting out ADUs are, yes, charging, you know, what the market will bear and as much as they can get for it, but that rent levels in the Portland market, not an exact comparison, are about $1,100 to $1,200 a month,
Yeah, that's what I've seen.
averaging, which is below the average rental for all dwelling types in the city. So it's not affordable, but again, that's why this is the equitable housing, not the affordable housing project. We're not trying to hit a certain cap, we're just trying to create greater variety, and by increasing supply, provide more opportunities and hope that that helps.
As I said, I understand the
stabilize.
intent. I
Yeah.
just don't think we can ever get there with the economy.
There's a lot of
going
work
like
to
it is.
do, yep. Yeah, there's a lot of market forces that we're up against, for sure.
And I guess I'd say if we don't at least strive, then we definitely won't get there. So,
Right, we know where we're at.
And, you know, as far as ADUs, I've bounced back and forth on this owner occupancy question. You know, my first thought is if the owner's there on the property and the other tenant, whether they're, you know, whichever one they're renting is, you know, a jerk, then there's some kind of immediate response to that. Because you can go knock on the owner's door and say, that guy's being a jerk. But if the owner's in California, yeah. But if the owner's in California and both units are being rented out, and you can't even get them on the phone and they don't respond to your voicemail or whatever, and it's, you know, something, you know, I hear from people who have problems with their neighbors, whether they're the owners or renters or whatever, that are things like, they know I have asthma and they stand underneath my window and blow the smoke in. That's not anything that code enforcement can do anything about. And so, you know, it's, you know, so I'm a prisoner in my home, I have to leave my windows closed all the time. But the flip side of that, and the reason why I keep waffling, for lack of a better term really, is that house can still be rented, whether it's an ADU or not, and that owner could still be in California. Like you were saying, the parity with, you know, with other housing types is, it doesn't require, you know, the owner to be within any square mileage of whether it's the property line or not. So, you know, and I think largely what, you know, what I've seen, it bears out your data, that it's the granny flat, it's the in-law suite, it's, you know, the place for the, you know, friends from the East Coast to stay. You know, more than it's somebody renting it out, because at least right now, I don't think Oregon City has the tourist business to draw people in to, you know, to really do that. It doesn't mean it won't happen in the future.
Oh, they're there. It's just underground.
Yeah. I guess my biggest concern is in new construction that the person will build the house pre-ADU'd. That, you know, it's an R10 and he builds a 2,000 square foot house with an 800 square foot finished basement. You know, and so that is new construction, you know, and that is doubling the occupancy of the R zone, as opposed to these older, more established neighborhoods where somebody just fixes their basement or their attic or whatever, which is less of an impact because it isn't everybody that's gonna be able to do it. But when a whole subdivision's built for that, I mean, I have to question whether it's a house with an ADU or an underground duplex. You know, have you just slid duplexes in? Because my house is only 840 square feet, and 800 square feet's allowed. And I got 2 bedrooms, a bath, a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen. So, you know, that's a significant basement or attic or building next door. And so my concern isn't the retro ADU.
Yeah.
It's the pre-planned ADU subdivision. And so that's where I'm really having the difficulty.
If I can add something to what you're saying, Damon, I know I live in an HOA. They do not allow anything like that. And most new construction have no basements. And the HOA rules are saying no subdividing, no other houses. And boy, they're so strict. I
But
mean,
it has to be legally enforced,
and
not by
so,
the city.
so that's the HOA, right?
Yeah.
And so I keep thinking all these that are gonna be built or being considered to be built are in older sections of the city, older homes like McLaughlin neighborhood and some of those, because most new home construction are HOAs as they come in, and most of them are no basements.
Except that if I'm the subdivider, if I'm the person who built the subdivision, I'm the person who writes the HOA rules.
Right.
And so if I built with the intent to let ADUs in, to let duplexes exist, then I'll just write it in the thing.
But specifically, are you getting at, is it an issue of occupancy and traffic, or is it of short-term rentals, or what issue is it that you're trying to avoid?
Parking.
Well, I mean, this doesn't get into parking, but that is one concern. But the other, my concern is that in particularly new construction, it would be a way to subvert the zoning,
But, and
which is our purview.
I'm playing a little devil's advocacy
And
here.
that's
but-
what we're here for. I got no problem with that.
But if we're avoiding a second address, then they aren't really subdividing it. What I'm trying to balance is with the difference between a big family that has multiple drivers, lots of ins and outs, versus someone that has a short-term EDU that's not occupied, you know.
Or even if it is, just by
Right.
grandma or the mom-in-law who's
exactly.
retired.
So on balance, like, what are we hoping to achieve? Because I agree, like, we don't want duplexes, and to me, a duplex is a separate address and separate mail and things like that, but a short-term ADU might not be on margin any different, or even, it might be better than a large family that is occupying that same space.
Oh, and also, it's 60% of the living area, not 800, so you would be capped at around 500 in your case,
Right.
but.
But if I'm building a 2,000 square foot house, 60% is 800 square feet.
Sure.
So, and it's real easy to build that basement to meet that need. In fact, that's probably where if I was developing, I'd do it as a basement as opposed to an attic, but,
Considering all the rock in
If you
your
could.
area as well.
well, I'm not considering my area. I'm considering Park Place,
Yeah.
South End,
Yeah.
Park,
Beaver Creek.
Beaver Creek, the new construction areas where we have whatever gets built.
Do you
So
realize that-
my concern
Excuse me.
gets back not to the owner occupancy question, and so I've kind of gotten astray. It's just that whole concern that somebody builds a subdivision pre-ADU'd, and the zoning is R8, and now they've got ADUs, so you've now really turned it into R4? Because you've doubled the occupancy? I mean, so that's my concern, which is outside this question.
It's a parallel question.
Yeah, so as far as owner occupancy, I don't think that it matters that much to me one way or the other, to be honest. I can see the pros and cons of each answer, and both of those answers depend upon the specific owner. Is the owner somebody who rents to jerks? Or is the owner someone who is responsible, wants to see his investment not be destroyed? And so, and if that's the kind of owner it is, it doesn't matter whether he rents 1 or 2 units. If he's an investment owner, he's gonna rent to responsible people. So,
just to add real quickly to what you said, can you imagine the prices of new homes if they did add basements to them? Because that means digging it all out and all the cement and all the other structure, all those new homes, that's why they're making them at this price. If they added
Right, but if I,
basements,
but if I say it's a $600,000 house and you can rent for $1,000 a month,
Yeah.
you know, that pays the difference in mortgage.
true.
So,
But the builders just aren't doing that. But yeah, I know what you
You're
mean.
not gonna do it.
anyway, that's my fear. I'm okay with whatever decision we make on owner occupancy. I think I lean slightly towards not, but it's,
Let's move on.
so, next item.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, if that's not controversial enough, why don't we talk about off-street parking?
Oh, God. I saw the 1.25 cars.
Yeah. All right, so before we delve into some of the specifics of the recommendation, I do just want to take a minute and acknowledge that, you know, this is a really big topic, how off-street parking, and that it's something that communities in Oregon City, as well as around the region, are really wrestling with. But there is, you know, a fundamental choice here between prioritizing housing options and prioritizing off-street parking in the way that we write a lot of these development regulations. And so, you know, I don't want you to think that staff is oblivious to the impacts of cars. I mean, it's not that we don't see them, and, you know, yes, our crystal balls might be, you know, need some repair and whatnot. But yes, it is, you know, a likely consequence that adding some new units, whether it's ADUs or 3 to 4 plexes, or some of the other recommendations, will not result in any increase in parking. You know, we understand that, and that's part of the recommendation and part of the balance of features and potential impacts that went into developing this package that generated a lot of discussion at our public open houses and with our project advisory team and our technical advisory team. And, you know, with that, the recognition, you know, if there is not parking spaces provided off-street, you know, there will be some additional parking on the street. But that when we again come back to our overarching goal of equitable housing, and looking about how we can increase housing availability, the guiding principle that the PAT and the staff used in developing the recommendation was how do we permit more housing, and using that as the highest goal, as well as, you know, in part, we talked about pricing and whatnot, that providing off-street parking definitely has a cost. And so weighing those costs against, you know, what can we do to help support housing at, you know, we're not, again, regulating a certain price point, but regulating features that would help allow some development that would come in at a lower cost than it would otherwise come in at. So with that acknowledgement, the proposed parking standards, for discussion to tonight. So a few that are already existing, the single-family detached, your traditional subdivision single-family home is currently 0 and proposed to stay 0. Townhomes, the single-family attached, and duplexes, same story there. There's currently no minimum, and that's proposed to be the same. And you know, even with those standards or lack of standards, you know, you see a lot of those housing types developed with off-street parking provisions. And so the main category that we're here to discuss, that I understood we're still having some active discussion about, is the group in red, the missing middle uses. So first off, proposing to add corner duplexes. The recommendation here is to have a 0 minimum similar to existing duplexes. For the ADUs, the proposal, there is currently a minimum of 1 off-street parking space, and the staff and PAT recommendation is to drop that down to 0, to add some additional flexibility in how those ADUs can be developed. Particularly if if the choice is, I have an existing garage, I could convert to an ADU and house people, or I could leave it a garage and house cars. That isn't the trade-off in every scenario, but in those cases where that is the fundamental question, then this recommended minimum of 0 would facilitate more housing options. Likewise, internal conversions, since there is no analogy right now, it's a new housing type. Propose it to come in with a minimum of 0, and likewise for the 3 to 4 plexes, proposed with 0. And then just for comparison, I also threw up the multifamily and the cluster housing requirements here. Cluster housing is proposed to go, it's currently 1.5 spaces per unit, and it's proposed to be dropped down to 1 space per unit, and multifamily is proposed to go from, right now it's 1 to 1.75 spaces, depending on how many bedrooms, which is a really unique way of regulating parking in the sense that you'll notice none of the other housing types are regulated based on size or bedroom count. And so we looked at a couple different ways to slice that, what other cities are doing, and talking to some stakeholders about what might make a difference in facilitating more multifamily construction. And rather than, write a bunch of arcane rules, we came up with just a recommendation for a straight one space per unit proposed minimum to simplify that. All right.
Okay, I guess before you
Yes.
change that, my big problem is the existing minimums for the orange. I did not realize there was no requirement for off-street parking. So, wow. That's worked out really well in Portland, hasn't it?
I watched your
I don't
debate.
think this is necessary.
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry, excuse me.
No, I was gonna say, I watched your debate a few weeks ago when you were talking about 1 1/4 parking and all the other. I'm going, that'd be fun with a quarter. So are you saying here that the accessory dwelling unit, existing minimum is 1, that they have to have 1 space in their garage or on the street?
Or on the street.
Somewhere.
On the street.
Yeah.
And now it's 0?
The proposal is 0.
Because if
That's
you have
coming.
somebody moving into an accessory, whether it be grandma still drive and mother-in-laws, and they drive you crazy. No, just kidding. I don't have one, so I don't have to worry about that. But I'm just saying that seems strange to not, with an ADU, not to have require at least 1 other parking spot on some of these. Am I just off base on that? Damon, I remembered hearing you talking about that, but it just seems like no requirement of any space for some of these. What am I missing here?
Well, I think also need to think about the individual owner and what's there already. Like how many of these ADUs are being built in older units that have a driveway or have a full street with parking in the front of
Only
it?
in the newer developed areas. In the existing areas, we've got narrower streets, we've got
Right.
And we've got about,
problems.
and yeah, so ADUs, we have, what did we do, a statistic, about 25 of them have been built? In
23, yeah.
23 in 15 years. And we don't know if removing the parking requirement is going to incentivize a glut of new ADUs, but
Right.
the statistics and some of the analysis that's been done seem to indicate that this is a factor that,
I hate to come across as Mr. Negative about that and then also this issue, but I keep thinking, you have more people living in a residence. People aren't giving up their cars. We live in a hilly area of Oregon City, and people are not giving up their cars even though they want them to be on Max and Light Rail. And most of the time, if I take Light Rail, I have to drive to that location to get on Light Rail in Milwaukee. But I keep thinking not to have a minimum for some of those extra cars. I've seen the streets that you're referring to, narrow, where the cars parked all along, and you have to wait for someone to come this way while you go the other way. And I keep thinking not to have some requirement or a wider driveway, or,
yeah.
again, either I'm really missing something really big here, or it just doesn't seem right.
But to your point, Damon, it hasn't worked for Portland. Portland has the highest bike commute rate in the country for a large city.
And they still have parking problems.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what about a place that doesn't have a bike commuting ratio and we still need to park cars?
Right, but you get to that higher active transportation and transit mode by supporting and making it easier and making it harder to drive and park. And in an age where car ownership is trending downward, it seems like we would want to build our community to the direction that we're going instead of hanging on to
Wow.
transportation modes that are antiquated.
I don't fundamentally disagree with you, but I think it's gonna be a cold day and you know where before Oregon City becomes a bike town. I just don't see it.
I still can't make it to
Yeah.
the top of my hill.
There's
Yeah.
2 of them.
Yeah, I mean,
There's 2
like
of
I
us in
said,
my
when I
house.
lived in the hilltop, I rode my bike to work every day. When I moved down here, there's no way I
I
was
don't
riding
disagree.
There's 2 of us in my house. We have 5 vehicles and 2 motorcycles. Ain't no way I'm
Yeah,
ever
I
gonna
mean,
release.
I want to believe, I really want to believe fundamentally that we can get people out of their cars, but unless we can fundamentally change the topography of Oregon City, which I don't, well, maybe when the big one comes, that will change it. But
Ouch.
I know, I don't see Oregon City in my wildest dreams, I don't see this community making that change. It's,
Not overnight.
no, it's not gonna happen overnight, and I don't foresee it in my lifetime, and I'm planning to be around a very long time because of our topography. I mean, I see the hardcore biker guys riding through our town on the weekend, and they are struggling getting up
God bless them.
the hill. I mean, I'd be pushing my bike up there. Or one of our neighbors has an electric bike. I saw some guy going up there today with an electric bike. That's probably how you can do it without, killing yourself. I think they're somehow again, everything that I see that's being proposed is basically just like every other community. And we, again, I'm trying to get us back to what is going to work for Oregon City. So there needs to be some compromise, I think, in this regarding our unique situation. I think making everything zero is not the answer, and I think the other side is not the answer either. So where's the middle? Where's the middle ground?
So you're talking reality, not dreams and hoping.
Like I said, I would like in my wildest dreams that this would be a bike town. It's just not, I don't see it happening.
Never
I
will.
don't see it happening.
The other problem is that Oregon isn't, as much as you want to say it's bike country, it isn't. You don't get on your bike, strap your skis on, and go up to Mount Hood.
Everybody gets in their Subarus and drives up there.
You don't get on your bike and strap your surfboard on and go to the coast. It's just,
That's just a naive statement, David. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
You go and you rent a car. You go
Yeah.
and you go to a shared use
Reach now,
place. I
yes.
mean, there's lots of options like that. I mean, people still live lives.
yeah, but, or what most of them do is they talk to their friend with the car and say, let's go.
Sure.
So somebody somewhere has to have a car in order to go from point
That's
to
how we
point.
do it. The Friends have the car.
Yeah,
Yes,
the friends
the
with
friends,
driveways
the
who don't
friends,
have a
yeah.
car.
I'd like to go a different direction with, we're talking of off-street parking. But if you flip to the other side, what's the on-street parking? What's the capabilities of on-street take care of some of this? Obviously, we have to have some on-street parking, but I don't see any data here that says it would offset lowering our proposed minimums.
It's all on street. That's what it is.
Well, we've got some off-street parking, but what is the available on-street parking that would be a
So,
compromise here?
An on-street parallel parking spot,
We don't have
in,
parking
if you look at the
inventory.
parking code, is about 22 feet of curb. That allows you to pull in, pull out without bumping into somebody. So if you've got 22 feet of available curb, maybe you have less, maybe you have more. It doesn't have to be right in front of your house because it's public right of way. Sorry, people. Everybody has a right to park there.
Yes, they do on the street.
But, that's the dimensional standard, and then your typical local street standard is 50 to 54 feet wide, with 2 parking lanes on either side. That's not always the case, as Denise said. However, that's the standard. So,
Every street in Oregon City is a 60-foot right of way.
Is there any change in that for post office boxes, mailboxes, things like that?
yeah, I mean, what do you mean in terms of?
As in, like, someone can't park in front of my mailbox. That we don't count that chunk.
Those
when we're
multiple
doing the measure.
mailboxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess
you
if
can't
the
park in
post
front of that,
office
yeah.
sprayed the curb,
Why not?
or the fire district had a no parking requirement because of a narrower street section, then you get into an issue, which is what you see in the higher density areas, which has a constrained street. But what we're, under the new TSP, the minimum right-of-way is 54 feet, which accounts for parking on both sides and 2 travel lanes. So,
How long has that been in effect?
That's a little tight to fit into.
that's been in effect since 2013. It went up 1 foot in width.
Because I
So
know
it's-
our home development was 2003, and
Yeah.
we have 2 fires on our street already since that time. And fire trucks couldn't get through because there was cars on both sides, and it was
Yeah.
fire trucks, ambulances, and it was all they could do to get around.
on,
And that's a wide street.
yeah.
Well, I guess I would just say a couple more considerations to frame this as we get into some more specifics is to keep in mind this is minimum requirement. So part of this also comes down to, what's our preferred regulatory approach? This does not say what the maximum is. It simply says you will not be required, what the minimum requirement is. And, as we've seen, with single family and duplex types, many developers elect to build residences that include parking because exactly they know the communities, they know what their market is, they know that people are going to buy it and want space for their 5 cars and their 2 motorcycles, and they know they can sell it for more. If you have something with no parking, then you have a different market that you're trying to sell it to. And also just in terms of our comparisons, I think that the no minimums in Portland that we hear a lot about really apply to multifamily. And so a little bit different than the scenario that we're talking about here, since we're mostly proposing to move the minimums to 0 for the missing middle types, which are going to be smaller and likely, fewer numbers than, some of those cases you see in Portland with, just apartment after apartment after apartment, all with 0. So
Can I ask one other question about that?
Yeah.
On the 3 to 4 plex, not applicable because we didn't have 3 to 4 plexes here before?
correct.
But when you have 3 to 4 homes, plexes, and there's no minimum required for 4 homes with 4 people, different families living in them?
It'd be similar to the standard for a single-family attached, that's a 0.
4 townhouses.
They usually have a garage,
Right, and they provide
And
it
they can
anyway
easily do
because
that,
of the
yeah.
market.
but the 4-plex, I was thinking, where will all those people park? But
It's just what Elizabeth said. The regulatory minimum proposal is 0. They can,
Okay.
they can build more, and they very likely would.
okay, thanks.
So a few other considerations as we're working through these, particularly for the missing middle housing types. So I tried to go with an F theme for this slide. So fairness, thinking about, again, how there's no off-street parking required for single-family townhouses or duplexes. And so looking at, well, how can we bring over that same regulatory approach to these missing middle types, saying we'll have some flexibility, moves into the next, and how we use this, as well as particularly for some of these infill types, having the ability to adapt existing types as people's transportation needs change today and in the future. Looking at, we maybe don't want homeowners to be locked into their exact configuration today. Say you have a 2-car garage and 2 parking spaces in the driveway, looking at ways to provide more flexibility of how you use that space, maintain some for parking, some for residents. In terms of feasibility, particularly for ADUs, you hear stories, but it could also apply to some of these internal conversions that we're talking about, is just having more options for lot and structure layout. This certainly is not going to be 100% of the time. A lot of the people that are going to want to build these types, they know their market. They're going to be looking for ways they can provide parking. That's going to be a value add, in terms of marketing these units. But sometimes there might be a trade-off in terms of, can you keep the parking, add parking, or create new dwelling units? And how can we provide the greatest feasibility in terms of how these are put together? And then last, diffusion. So yeah, I snuck the F in terms of a lot of these missing middle types are really going to be limited in terms of numbers. We have 23 ADUs right now. Even if that's 23 cars parked on street, it's spread all the way across the city. Let's say we're massively successful and we have 4 times that number of ADUs. We're still looking at a fairly limited number of these units and relatively spread across the city. So as well as the ability, as Pete says, we can always come back to these. There are additional parking management tools that we can bring to bear if there are specific concerns, say a particular neighborhood, if there are particular streets or areas that are having parking concerns, then we can take a look at managing parking, but really leading with housing and looking at, in terms of our equitable housing project goals, how can we get these units, provide options for these units to be built, and then address some of those impacts like parking, if and when they do occur.
Well, and here's my problem. You can take away parking that exists. You don't get to add parking that doesn't exist. If they build no garages and say park on the street, and that street becomes unmanageable, there is no resolution for that. You have to tear down the houses and rebuild them. But if we say the minimum is 1 parking space per dwelling unit, or one for every 2 dwelling units, rounded up, if we go for a 3-4 plex or a internal conversion. And it turns out it's not a problem because of how the street's populated with bike riders, and we get a bus line through because there's enough people, and things have changed, and people have 1 car instead of 5. then you can take that away. You can let them build on their driveway or convert their garage. There is an opportunity for change if you require parking. There is no opportunity for change if you don't require parking.
It's not entirely true. I'm sure our planners could probably speak more effectively on managing parking from the city perspective, but I mean, there's ways to do it.
How?
How parking, well, I should let Pete answer, actually.
Well, parking enforcement is a code enforcement issue. And there's several ways I think you can deal with it. One is residential parking permits, but the other ways are just making sure, well, you know, there's the problem of people not using their existing garages for parking and storage, and that's a difficult thing to regulate as well.
Right, but almost all of those have driveways.
Yeah. So.
When you ask anybody around the city, again, Chit Chat or any of those other areas, what's the biggest one of the bigger problems facing Oregon City? Parking. That's why our own citizens say they don't come downtown, there's not enough parking, and they say they try to take the elevator up and down, but they said they've been told people don't want them parking and taking up all the McLaughlin neighborhood up above, or there's the hours, but people keep saying parking downtown, that's why they don't come down. Yet this weekend I had South Carolina, Nebraska, Connecticut, Westland, Milwaukee, but only 2 people from Oregon City, and every time you ask, parking. So I know if it's there downtown, it's up in the neighborhoods as well.
To defend the elevator, the hours right now are till 9:30.
I know, they're extended,
So
that's what I
they're
keep telling
extended.
them. They're so used to the old way, but
Well, then they need to be informed.
I know.
So there's several ways to go. One, require it. One, have a no net loss kind of an approach to ADUs and internal conversions. And
I would
we're not
prefer
asking
that
for a
than,
decision right now.
I would prefer that than just nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think no net loss is very defensible.
I agree.
But you still haven't answered his question, which is,
I know, I'm
how do
having a
you
hard time answering it.
backfill parking if it isn't built?
You don't.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
buy
it's-
I think
a
you manage what
corner
you
lot
have.
and put
You
a,
have to
you
manage
have-
what you have, yeah.
Yeah, you manage what you have, and then
Yeah.
it's a matter of.
If you move to Oregon City, you can't bring a car with you.
But
And you attract certain types of renters or owners to properties that do or do not have parking. If I have 5 cars, I'm not gonna look to buy a house on a street that has no off-street parking if I know that the on-street parking is really limited. So, you know, it isn't an immediate fix by any means, but especially if we're building new streets with parking on both sides, there is some supply of off-street park or on-street parking, and to the extent that that matches the demand on the street, I think you hear the concerns in Oregon City, right? But I would challenge you to find any community, whether it's Washington DC or New York City or Portland or Oregon City, where people don't say that parking's a problem.
New York City's not a good example.
My point is that no matter where you go, no matter how hard parking is to find, even if it's multiple times harder than it is in downtown Oregon City, people will complain that there's no parking. So there's almost nowhere where you can go where people say, there's so much parking, I don't know what to do
We
with
just don't want
it.
to see it get worse here, like the other places.
let's try to take a look at a no net loss approach. Elizabeth, I certainly appreciate your data and that you're using Portland, and I don't want to come across as anti-Portland, but I don't find Portland data credible for
No,
Oregon
I
City.
do not.
caveat that
I
before.
did give many
Yeah.
caveats. I
Yeah.
agree.
Just caveats,
I was
yeah.
very, very hesitant to even share this, but I just, in the spirit of a discussion and
Yeah.
working session, I thought that I would.
We're trying to avoid their problems and bringing all their problems that they're
Yeah,
having to hear.
But yeah, I think I would support a no net loss. That's, I mean, that way they're not, if they don't have it, they don't have it. If they got it, then they can't build on it.
I got, and I understand that I missed a couple, so just maybe perhaps so that I could understand a little, one of the sort of thought experiments and trying to understand how this might work is, you know, let's say, keep in mind, there is no minimum parking requirement for a single-family house right now. So I could have no parking, but let's say I choose to have 2 spaces in the garage and 2 in the driveway. Now, it feels like you'd be penalizing the person that does have off-street parking to say, nope, that's frozen in stone, you have to keep 4, even though the requirement for everybody else is
But I
0.
don't think you have 4, you have 2.
Yeah.
Well, it depends how you count it.
2 in the garage and 2 in the,
Yeah,
Driveway.
but it's 2 in the driveway that are the parking. Because as Tom said, 90% of the people can't get their car in their garage. So,
In terms of no net loss, is the proposal you'd have to keep all 4, or would 2 in your driveway be sufficient?
2 with the driveway would be sufficient
Yeah,
in my
it's-
mind.
A lot of the newer homes are 3-car garages too.
yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to build anything like that in mobile.
I mean, it's counted
No.
differently in different places, so.
Right.
Yeah, I'd just say no net loss of uncovered parking. So if they want to enclose their carport and make that their ADU, then that's fine, as long as there's still. But I mean, I understand completely what you're saying about, you know, to a certain extent, if we want people to get out of their cars, we have to make cars uncomfortable.
So we have to make alternatives available, and we do not
Right.
control TriMet or any other sort of
Right,
transportation.
but even if TriMet were available, if people are still comfortable in their cars and comfortable in their car use, the majority of people will do that. Just because it's easier to walk out and get in your own car and control exactly your own time and destiny.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why carpools don't generally work, because I gotta wait around for a half hour and I got an early out by my boss and, you know.
How many
so-
of us biked here tonight?
Well, I'm just, irrespective of that, I'm just saying, so I understand completely that point. And so, you know, making things a little uncomfortable is fine, but I just, again, I'm stuck in my old neighborhood where 80% of the streets are impassable if both people are parking on them, even if it's just one car. If they're both parking on the street, they've got to park staggered, and if they don't want to, there's really nothing I can do about that. They're parked in the public right-of-way where they can, and sorry that I've got a truck with wing mirrors. I guess I'm riding my bike, because that's the only thing I can get through, you know, and, you know, so I think, you know, a no net loss of, you know, non-garage parking would at least be the compromise. That, and sorry, Tom, you got 5 cars, you're gonna have to figure out what to do. But if you convert your garage, that was a choice you made to make your cars wet.
Well, one of them's a hearse, that doesn't count. I'm kidding.
You can sleep in the cars.
It's an RV, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's an RV.
A reclined
So
vehicle.
we got 20 minutes to get through the last 5 issues, which, so
They're the easy ones.
they should
So they bring
go
back all the
quickly.
ones that we like.
This issue, we talked about the last time, with respect to the mixed-use downtown. Proposal is to allow the full 75-foot height limit in the mixed-use downtown for properties within 100 feet of a residence and between Main Street, McLaughlin, and 11/16th. We did some mapping, and this map indicates, the red dots indicate the mixed-use downtown zone in green. And the dots are residential uses within 100 feet of the mixed-use downtown. So what you're seeing there is an area that is the regional center for Oregon City, and the mixed-use downtown zone is intended to be an urban zone that is built to support transit-oriented development and that sort of thing. It also includes the downtown Main Street area, which we discussed last time. The concern is that the areas that are within 100 feet of a home are suddenly penalized and cannot redevelop it to the full height limit in the mixed-use downtown zone, just because of the presence of a residence, which is technically a non-conforming use in that zone. So what we intended to show here was just, the way we did that was look at any property that had a business license, and then we also looked and took out the vacant properties, and then we took out all the LLCs, and this is what we ended up with. So some of these red dots are, might not be residences, but we're fairly sure that some of them, most of them are.
So you needed to have done this topographically.
Well, yeah,
we-
this
or
is,
not-
this is
we have a
our
bluff there.
GIS capability
Yeah.
and, you know, given the time we had. Anyway, that's an illustration of that. And we welcome any discussion that you have about this. I know the concerns that we heard last week were, would building out to 75 feet create a view corridor impact? And we've discussed that the area that is indicated here is not an area that is going to be blocking views from the bluff. It's
And
the
the area
bluff.
we're talking about is the one in the blue?
Yeah, that's the area between Main Street and McLaughlin, 11 and
How are we
16.
sure that it doesn't block anybody on the bluff?
Well,
Pretty much.
pretty much.
Okay, I know we had that controversy in Portland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's also concerns, you know, preserving views of the river and and some regulations require stepping down towards the river and that sort of thing, which is more of a design guideline than it is an actual height requirement. And we're not advocating for that. What we're advocating for is allowing these properties to develop to their full potential, given the zoning that they're in.
Well, just real quick, just
I walked
for
through there.
example, the block between Main and Center, 12th and 13th,
Okay,
that isn't in the blue, can they build the 75 feet? Irrespective of residence, can they build the 75 feet?
yes,
Okay, so the only 45 would be for, the impact for those 45s would be for the next block down, the Main to Center block, that next strip, for them to sell Riverview condos in their top 3 stories. If we were to keep the 45 feet.
yeah,
I mean-
you'd have a step down effect,
When-
essentially.
Yeah. And part of that is they're already down 15 feet below grade for McLaughlin.
Okay. That may be true. I just don't know where the elevation is there, so.
Well, I know McLaughlin didn't flood, but everything else.
Everything else did, right, yeah,
We're still picking up oranges from Spicers. So,
yeah.
so if they built 75, you basically, and we left it at 45 feet for this, we'd give the top story a view of the top story of the other one, and maybe a view of the river.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
So,
Yeah,
but if we did 75 feet there, they'd definitely be looking into their neighbor's apartment,
yeah,
which the first 5 stories would be anyway.
yeah, I think you're right,
Okay.
yep.
So I'm not sure why you did the GIS for the historic core, because I thought that what you had mentioned, that there is a requirement that subject, heaven forbid.
He just circled it on my
Okay,
district.
because heaven
Oh.
forbid that anything would happen to any of the buildings, that they wouldn't, nothing in that corridor would be taller than the Masonic.
That's in the downtown design district,
Right.
which is the 56 or whatever it is.
So
Yeah.
that's why I wasn't understanding why
Sorry.
you couldn't separate the GIS just said all the MUD. The previous map
Yeah.
that you just showed,
This one?
yes, because you're showing
Yeah.
stuff all along.
That's all the MUD.
Yeah, so that really isn't applicable to this at all.
No, I
Going
mean,
from 10th south,
Yeah, 5th to 10th.
right,
yeah, you're.
or 1st to 10th. It's not really applicable.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
You're right. We
Okay.
should have shown that.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
that's where my confusion, because I thought we were only talking about the area from 11 over.
May I
So,
Point
sorry, go
north.
ahead.
Ask a question, can you flip back to that last one? Would that require, because most of these probably aren't earthquake safe and they're older buildings, would that require that if somebody wants to build a 75, that they would have to tear down the existing businesses that are there to build
Probably. They couldn't add on top.
I don't know.
Pardon, say it again. I
They couldn't
hear-
add on top, no.
We
Not
don't
to
have
the-
any
where they are.
requirements for if it's an addition or a new building.
So they would have to tear down any existing businesses there probably.
They would have to do their own
Not business,
analysis on
the
their
building.
structures.
Well, buildings are businesses in that area.
Well, they'd have to tear down the existing building. The business is irrelevant to
Yeah.
what's in the building.
But I was just wondering. Okay.
That kind of brings my question, Pete. You had said the residences that are in this area are non-conforming. Can you give a little bit more background on their
So
history?
single family, the height limitation is when you're 100 foot from a single family attached or detached building.
Right.
So those aren't listed as a permitted use. So if you've got one that's in the district now and it's pre-existing, it can continue indefinitely.
We don't know where the bluff is.
As long as it's not discontinued, it's allowed to be used as a residential use.
So it was
Yeah.
pre-existing before we
Before the
established
mixed-use
it.
downtown zone was established.
Got it.
That's, yeah, correct.
Yeah,
I
Anchor
don't
Way.
think so. This
There's
is,
Anchor Way.
this is Center, this is not.
So that's that issue. I don't know that we're gonna get resolution on
That would
that,
be
but
Washington.
let's keep talking through the other issues. Okay?
I just wanted to acknowledge that, I mean, near 12th, I mean, the height, the topography does level out quite a bit. It's just the railroad in between.
Right in the
When we were
trestle.
talking about Main Street.
Yeah,
But
you
it
got the
does,
trestle.
certainly 14th Street, 12th Street, it does even out a little bit. That gap is a little bit less.
Right, yeah.
So we are
the
not,
elevated
again, we're
trestle.
not certain on what the
They need
views
building
will or wouldn't be. We just
right
wanted to
next
have a
to it. I
larger
don't see that
discussion
happening.
about the regional center and
Yeah.
what those trade-offs really are.
Okay. Next item. Food carts. So what we did was we did separate out food carts as a separate definition in the definition section of the code. And the proposal is to go with the current district, which is allowing these in the Willamette Falls Design District. There was discussion last week about allowing food carts in other zones, principally industrial and employment type zones, where, you know, people are going to take advantage of those services. That there are some other standards associated with these food carts. So the mandate or the direction here was to establish standards for food carts, and which is what is in the code. And current proposal is to have them be a permitted use in the Willamette Falls Design District, but not any other zones without a special event permit. Right now, they would have to meet the public works standards and would probably have to hook up to sewer and water facilities. So that's an issue for these types of units, still being worked out. Anyway, and then they would be permitted for up to 5 hours within a 24-hour period, or permanently with more requirements. So, yeah.
Next to Winco, when was it arriving, and next to parking?
Winco's-
No, I'm just saying, next to those subjects on Chit Chat, everybody keeps saying, why don't we have food carts? Who in the heck at City Hall won't allow us to have food carts? And
Right.
I think anybody who's out there knows that people just, why don't we have food carts? And people have tried to explain to them, it's in the code, so why they don't show up to say a comment about it, I don't know, but boy, food carts is such a hot topic.
Yeah.
So it was our staff recommendation, as Pete identified in the code currently, food carts, mobile food carts or vendors are permitted in just the Willamette Falls
Yep.
district, and they have been for years. We just don't have any standards for them. So we approached this with blinders on, thinking that there may need to be a larger community conversation about where they would be allowed or not allowed, or something beyond the scope of the Willamette Falls site.
You're not talking about just the new Willamette Falls Heritage Site, you're talking all downtown or just?
No, just the Willamette
Just
Falls
the Blue
Legacy
Heron.
Project
Just the
site.
Blue Heron
It has
area.
its own
So that's
zoning
a long ways off,
We
designation.
came to some conclusion last time that we were looking at allowing them in other places. And that was our,
But only by a special event.
No.
you see. Oh, okay.
no, what we talked about at the last discussion of this is we wanted to see them allowed elsewhere and wanted staff to come back with something else.
Okay.
And this is it?
No, this is not it.
Oh, phew.
So other zones would be campus industrial, general industrial, potentially mixed-use employment. And then the other question was, is it appropriate in the mixed-use downtown area, which is the area in green? Because that's where most of the controversy regarding these is,
Yes.
to be frank, so. And welcome more discussion on that.
Okay.
Okay.
I think general commercial would be appropriate.
GC,
Yes.
general commercial, okay.
I got you. I was sitting here because my TV's not working.
You don't have to move.
And
That's,
During the break, we'll get this working.
so that, you're not recommending they be in the mixed-use corridor and mixed-use downtown zones, though?
as far as I didn't hear that from any of us.
Yeah, I think the mixed-use downtown is a community conversation
Okay, for later.
because,
Yeah.
and I think with special events, that wouldn't be an issue, but
Yeah,
that is a general thing. I mean, my perception of these in Oregon City at this point is literally the guy who drives up, sits there for 20 minutes, takes care of the factory workers and moves on.
right.
That's not what happens necessarily downtown, especially now with all the places, the sandwich shops and other places. to
Yeah.
eat.
So,
So if
right,
we want to have pods,
right.
then that's a community discussion that I think is beyond what we're at.
No, I agree.
I agree with
I
you.
think that they're gonna require some economies of scale. And, you know, I could foresee maybe on some of the vacant property that Danielson's has, and maybe they wanna create a food pod. I don't know,
Yeah,
Okay.
but I think we'll leave it out of,
downtown for
yeah,
now.
downtown, yeah.
Okay. All right. Finally, this is an issue that was discussed with the Natural Resources Committee. In your new packets, not in your current packets, but in your new packets that we'll be handing out, we have recommended a couple of exemptions, the exempt activities within the Natural Resources Overlay District. And they're more clarifications. Within the Natural Resource Overlay District, it's a protected vegetative corridor. And you're not supposed to remove any of that vegetation without mitigation or some kind of replanting. And what happens is a tree will be leaning towards a house and it will be clearly a hazardous tree and in danger of falling on something. Or it's an invasive species or a nuisance species of tree that needs to be removed for some reason. And there's no code to deal with that situation other than to send them through a type 2 review process. So the idea here would be to allow removal of hazardous and nuisance trees, which are defined in the code, as defined by an arborist report, with appropriate mitigation if required. If it's not an invasive tree, if it's an invasive tree, meaning if it's on a nuisance list for the city or Portland plant list listed as invasive, we wouldn't require mitigation. We would require any disturbed area be reseeded underneath there with native plantings. The other issue was with respect to fences in the natural resource buffer. Currently, there's no provision to allow a fence, but there is a provision to allow existing gardens to remain. So this would help clarify that fences are a permitted use without a type 2 review. However, we are going to require 6 inches of separation between the bottom of the fence and the ground, minimum, that a 2-foot strip on either side of the fence be seeded with native species if there's any disturbance. Posts could not be placed within the top of bank of a stream. So the posts would have to be outside of any top of bank or wetland edge. And then that they would have to be subject to the height limits of the fence code which is 6 foot for a privacy fence and side yards and rear yards, and 3.5 foot in front yard areas. And this basically helps a lot of existing situations that are already in the NROD and makes it clearer for people to meet the standards of the overlay district abide by the native planting requirements without having to go through a lot of review. And the Natural Resources Committee reviewed these at their last meeting and approved the proposal.
So what is the problem that you're trying to solve here? Because what I'm hearing you say is that we're trying to allow people who have pre-existing non-legal fences to now be okay.
Well, they might be legal
They have to meet these standards?
if they want to put a new one up
Why do we
or
want to have a
replace an
fence in the
existing
natural
one.
resources overlay area anyway?
Pardon?
Why would we want to allow fences in the natural resources overlay area anyway?
Because people have backyards in the Natural Resources Overlay District and privacy requirements as well. So it's a balance that they're trying to strike.
Yeah, I don't want my dog running all over Helion. I want him fenced in my yard.
Okay, well then, you require vegetation on both sides. Well, most people, when it's on the other side of their fence, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, well, that's part of the public education issue that is so difficult to get to with just a set of regulations, you know. What we're trying to do is educate people about the Natural Resource Overlay District and why it's there. You know, this is just one part of the puzzle. And we try to do that through our website, and when people come in and ask about fences, and we find out they're in the NROD, then we have to deal with this issue. And it's been easier to deal with in some places than others, frankly. And so this is the approach that the NRC thinks is a good
So
one.
what about a wildlife corridor?
Well, wildlife corridors, you know, I mean, looking at the entirety of the NROD, upland wildlife corridors, if you're talking about areas up and away from where the streams are, that's another issue. But,
Like, how do they get through the fence?
well, I think the
Is
the
that the
discussion
6
was
inches?
if they're a deer, they're going to jump over it or go around it. If they're a smaller animal, a 6-inch minimum
They're
would
gonna
be
go under
sufficient
it?
to go under. But we could change those. We could change those minimums.
I've
and
seen
maximums.
deer clear 12-foot fences.
Exactly, yeah. So,
Are we mainly talking about private property, not public property?
yes, yes. This doesn't apply to the right-of-way. And we're coming up on the public hearing time here, so,
Yeah, well, we're gonna take a break.
yeah, it's fine.
So, thank you for letting us know about this.
Sure.
I'd say this is a good time to,
I just said we were taking a break.
okay, I thought you were just saying it as a general
No,
statement.
no,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, you want to whack it then?
Okay, we're going to close the work session. Obviously, there's still stuff to talk about, and we're gonna take a
7 minutes?
7 or 8 minute break.
Thank you.